Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the TC4RE Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jeramie, for this installment. In this episode, we are talking about how to prepare for an ethnically unrepresented workforce and the impacts culturally aware leaders can make. Our special guests for this episode are Zeph and Apay, two amazing individuals who work at Microsoft. Luckily, these two share a great relationship, and I'm excited to share their knowledge and insights with you, our listeners. So wherever you are, grab a notebook and a pen and enjoy the TC4RE Podcast. Well, speaking to the crowd, welcome to the Technology Community for Racial Equality Podcast, or abbreviated to TC4RE Podcast. I'm Alex Best, and I will be one of the hosts within this podcast series, and I'm joined by the beautiful Jel, who I'm sure she can introduce herself because she's going to do a way better job than me.
Well, I'll do my best, Alex, but thank you. I'm Jeramie Sutton, and I'm really happy to be joining Alex as the co-host with two of our very brilliant interviewees that we've got today. I join us from Microsoft, where I'm part of our education team, working with loads of our government customers around education. But today isn't about that, is it, Alex? Today is about a different topic.
Yes, most definitely. Today we're going to be focusing on a particular area that we think is suited to our listeners and suited to what we are trying to achieve as the TC4RE group. So a little bit more about me. So I am an account manager at SoftwareONE. I've been there for around a year and a half, and my experience before that was that I used to work for other resellers. I used to work in the publishing company, but I wanted to move to a company which is a little bit more suited to my needs. So that's why I ended up at SoftwareONE. And in more to relation with TC4RE, TC4RE is something that I'm really passionate about. We came together this year and was announced this year at Microsoft Ignite, and really looking forward to putting these podcasts out there so that you've got some information that you can go and listen to and digest and maybe take back to your businesses or to your peers or your friends or your family or anyone like that. So today we're joined by two amazing people. I'm almost surprised that we've been able to get both of them. I think the diary's been stacked for both of them, and to be able to get this time is honestly fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to leave them to introduce themselves. We've got Zeph and Apay on the call. Hi guys, how are we doing?
Hey, very good, thank you, very good.
Thanks for having me, or thanks for having both of us. Yeah, I feel like I'm on here with my big brother, because I've known Apay for years. So like when you kind of suggested me and Apay doing it together, I was like, oh, I could think of no better person to do this with, actually, because I think it'll be interesting. You'll see in the dialogue, like he's been like a mentor and like a teacher for me all throughout my career. When I started off when I was like 23 or something like that, 23, trying to do it. So I think it'll be great, like the dialogue, because we'll have real examples of my experience growing up in it, and then obviously his experience back. So it's a bit of it's a nice for me, in my opinion, as well. Not sure about from him, but from me.
Sounds feel a bit old now. Thanks for that. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's along the years, Zeph has definitely been one of those who I'd say is like my little brother. We've always stayed in touch, no matter kind of where we are in our careers or in life. It was one of the most exciting moments once I realized I'd be joining Microsoft, was actually that I was going to be spending time with Zeph and getting to work a lot more closer with him than I had done historically. So yeah, very, very great to be. And then I've met so many great people like Jeramie, so it's been an awesome time so far.
Good. Well, it sounds like we all love each other, which is brilliant. I'm sure we're going to make for a fabulous conversation. But I think, Zeph, you make a really good introduction there, because, you talk about, you've known Apay for a long time. We've all got different experiences throughout our careers, and we've all been in the tech industry for, a different amount of time. And one of the things that we really want to talk about today is, I guess, just looking at, over time, kind of our experiences from today, and however long we've been in the industry, kind of what what the representation feels like for people like ourselves, and how that might have changed, because the experiences, if you've been in IT for a year, might be different to if you've been in there 20. Not that I'm leading anyone to have been there that long. And it would just be, it'd be great to hear, I guess, Apay, if we start from you, I mean, how has it changed? How has the industry, and the tech industry specifically, changed in terms of how represented it feels for people from all different kind of backgrounds?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think kind of from a lived experience perspective, it's changed dramatically, and it's changed dramatically fast. I certainly recall when I first joined the industry back in 1886. No, it wasn't quite as far back as that, but I think it was just after 2000, and I would say the majority, and I mean majority, was over 90% plus of the individuals I came across and worked with, etc., were male, and most of them were certainly white male as well. What I did see, though, that was evolved quite quickly, and I mean quickly, it was literally a few years, more female representation coming in, and as I moved organizations, I certainly saw more and more females. I was exposed to more and more females, and it was really nice to see, and particularly also actually in more senior roles, not necessarily in the boardroom. The boardroom was still very much white male, white middle-aged men, and but again, by the end of 2010, I certainly started to see a lot more women starting to come into board level roles. I think how also then I started to see a lot more representation from our community, and the BAME community particularly, coming through, but it was still so small. You all knew each other, right? In an industry this size, I can tell you back then, pretty much every person of color that was in the industry of a certain level, we pretty much knew each other, and we saw each other in the same events, etc. And I probably why I love this guy so much, Zeph, was when he was one of the first I saw out of Microsoft that came to our organization. I was like, bro, great to see. Oh man, it was just like, it was awesome, and you guys will get to see this in the podcast and get to see he is just such an awesome guy. So being such an awesome person that he was, the energy he brings, the intellectual horsepower he brings as well. It was just so great to kind of meet with somebody like Zeph, and for me, he calls me a mentor. I think it's more kind of that brotherly engagement, and it was great to get reverse mentoring from Zeph, which I did at times, and also for me to share my own mentoring, my own support to him. But we saw the change, and so to where we are today, to get us to kind of catch us up to where we are today, I think there has been significant change, and I think we should not lose sight of that. Some of it is to do with the fact that in our industry, technology actually is doing a better job than most other places in terms of leveling, and it's about meritocracy more and more. We're not there yet. Let's not kid ourselves. We're not there yet. But if you think about the democratization of information, democratization of IT, it is helping, and it is bringing in a diverse workforce, but it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think you think about some of those points there, and you can ask the question, but I think over time, what you've seen, Joe and Alex, is that technology and the diversity of roles that are available in technology has expanded. So if when I was in school and someone said, do you want to work in tech? I don't know, what connotations would that have kind of brought into your head? It's probably way different as we've gone over time. And so I think that's opened up the doors. So when we get into some of the stuff that we do, like in our ERG communities, Employee Resource Group, is about raising aspirations and demystifying stuff as well. Because a load of people think, all right, I've got a code to be in tech, or, I've got to be a wide boy seller to be in tech, or whatever it is. And I think over time we've seen that that's changed, and people are understanding that there's sales roles in tech, there's strategy roles in tech, there's marketing roles in tech, there's technical roles in tech, there's partner facing roles, there's customer facing roles. Like there's there's HR in tech, there's finance roles in tech. Like, and I think that's really helped as well with the representation and more people being interested in technology in the industry, plus all the other kind of macro kind of things that are happening with tech kind of being pervasive through everything that we see. So it's kind of like a common word for like, fast growing industry. When you look at market cap and all of these kinds of those cool companies are all kind of aligned to tech. But I think you've got all these things coming together, plus 100% plus the cultural element, the social moves, that's coming, millennials, Gen Z, that kind of feel of what does the company I work for, what does it actually stand for? And, Alex and I were talking about this. And for me, one thing that I found strange, Apay, and maybe Joe, you found it strange, is that when I started in tech, when I was in 2011, I think, 2012, something like that. I don't count my internship. And let me count my internship as well, actually, because that's a key part of it, actually. Let me count that. Because when I started, and Apay, another reason why we clicked is because we're both...
That's true.
Finding any common denominator.
There's like a pseudo competition, like, who's doing this guy's doing this, another doing that. So, but, I just remember feelings of going into events as an intern. And, I was born and raised in South London, which is super cosmopolitan. And then when I think about, like, culture and diversity, it was never really about race. Like, I never really had that thing growing up, like, race. Like, all my friends were black, white, like, whatever. We were just all together in South London, trying to make it out of what we were doing, trying to raise aspirations, trying to get some money, trying to do whatever, escape the hounds and the chains and the negativities. And obviously there's great things in there, but that was our common goal and common mission. And so when you went out into like a different environment, like this workplace environment, I remember going into events and going, man, I'm like the only person that looks like me in this whole event. And it wasn't just looks like me, it was like talks like me, probably thinks like me, because I had similar experiences. So I just didn't even know what to talk about. And I think there's a combination when you're early in career as well. You've got like that anxiety in your head of I'm young, I don't know what I'm talking about. They're gonna find me out. Am I even meant to be here? Just plodding along. So you had all of these kind of things, just like you're dealing with. But over time, I've seen it. Like when I go into Microsoft and I see like get back the intern cohort or the graduate cohort, it's more representative. And I think there's also how tech has even democratized culture. So I even talk about this culture in terms of what we look like, and can I click with you on what we look like and assume things are what we look like? But there's also what we talk about. Do we have similar experiences? Or even if we don't, can I understand it? Can I walk in your shoes and get what it might have been like because I've spoken to someone else or I've engaged with someone else, if you get what I mean. So you don't feel excluded from an environment that you're in.
I've had a lot of really similar experiences, Zeph, and actually I remember really vividly that I did an internship as well, and I was living up in Nottingham, and my only two requirements were that one, that I could stay living in Nottingham, because clearly I wanted to stay with my mates who were not going on a placement year, priorities, and the other was that I'll work in any industry except for tech. That was my number one requirement. Wow. I just didn't see myself in any way as a female, as a woman of colour. There was nothing about it that reflected who I was. And I ended up working at Fujitsu, which was a great experience, but it's only because my overriding desire to be in Nottingham, and it was based in Sutton in Ashfield, which is about 40 minutes away, overrode my need for industry. I would add that I ended up living in Reading, so none of that plan went to plan, but yet here I am, over a decade later. And I think if I go back to that placement year, even my first graduate job, there was nothing about any of those experiences that I felt comfortable with, I would say, in terms of people that I felt that I could identify with, the people that I learned from and mentor still today, but they probably saw something in me as someone who's probably struggling a bit more because my first day on my first graduate job, I was subject to some radical sexism but equally some really, really strong support from some senior male members there as well. So I can identify with all of that. Early in career then feels really different. So I look at who's coming in the chain now and who wants to work in our companies. I felt like I was on my own, and I'm really, really glad to see it. Feels like culturally you don't see it. Doesn't mean that we don't need the support mechanisms, because I think that that's why it's grown. But equally, I'm really glad to see that 10 years later, things look and feel a bit different. And, you know, you mentioned earlier, Zeph, about ERGs. I mean, a lot of people won't know what that means, especially if they don't work at Microsoft. Could you tell us just a little bit more about that, and especially the role that you have in playing there?
So the Employee Resource Groups, or ERG, stand for Employee Resource Groups, and I know in some other organisations they call them Business Resource Groups. And essentially these are groups aligned to specific topics in an organisation. So if, for example, in Microsoft in the UK, we have the Embrace Employee Resource Group, which used to be called BAME, so aligned to race, ethnicity, culture. We've got a women's group, we've got an LGBTQI plus group, we've got a families group, a military group, we've got an accessibility group as well. And essentially these groups partner closely with the business, they partner closely with employees to take signals from employees, to take signals from the business, so that we can live out one of our mantras, which is come as you are and do what you love at Microsoft. So in our employee resource group, we're aligned to kind of 3 pillars, which is like, how do we inspire Microsoft UK around culture, race and ethnicity? How do we educate Microsoft UK around race, ethnicity and culture? And then how do we celebrate, you know, the diversity of cultures, races, ethnicity? And we do that through various modes. But then going back to a point that you made, Jel, around comfort, the ERGs are a big part of that. But I also think every single individual, if you're listening to this, that point of helping people to feel comfortable. I always think about my experiences when I, you know, coming from South London, a black male, and coming into certain environments, and that feeling of uncomfortability, like walking in to a place of feeling really uncomfortable. But then I always remember the people that went out of their way to make me feel comfortable, or did things to make me feel comfortable. And I think we can always do that. When we're in a room and we think, you know, does that person, do they look uncomfortable? Or we just think about the things that maybe an underrepresented group might by default feel uncomfortable. So how do we elevate their voices? How do we make them feel more comfortable? And I think those are the type of things linked to the point and what the ERGs do that anyone can do, and everyone can have the model in their head about when they're in a room and when they're leading people and they're managing people, or when they're just pairing their pairs or whatever it may be. Like, how do they do that? I think that everyone can do that.
I think it's quite interesting going into your internship, and Joe, you went into your internship as well. And I guess the common denominator here is we all had to start from somewhere as like our first job, or whether we've come out of uni or something like that. And we've all had to sort of overcome those barriers or hindrances, or had those little bumps in the roads to get to the point that we're at now. My question to you, Zeph, is if you were to talk to yourself, just coming into Microsoft, just starting that internship, what would be maybe 3 key sort of lessons or learnings you would give to that person to say, this is what you need to be successful, or to feel comfortable in the workplace, or just be the best person you can be at Microsoft?
I think the first one is, like, you're there for a reason. You know, you got hired, you went through I would assume a rigorous process to get there. You didn't just like walk in, ask for a badge, ask for an employee number, give them some figures on the sheet and say, pay me this, and then sat in the corner to do something. Like, you know, there's thousands of people that are coveting your thing. So I think the first one comes from like a self-esteem and a self-belief. I really believe that. And I think you have to ground yourself in who you are. That will be my main thing, actually, because over time the challenges just become different, I would say. Like, when you're early in career and you're battling with certain challenges and whatever, you get over that and then you go. But then when you're maybe mid-career, when you're senior, there's just a different type of challenge, and you're still, you know, from my perspective in the roles that I've done, and I say it, you know, leaders that I've worked with, managers that I work with, everyone's kind of, no one's perfect. Everyone's Everyone's got a boss. I think that's probably the way to say it. Like, everyone's got a boss. Everyone is trying to perform. Everyone is proving that they should, or proving, rather through their performance organically or inorganically, showing that they should be in the role. So I think there's always that element that, hey, believe that you're here for a reason, and try and really ground yourself in your ability, and ground yourself in the things that you've done that have got you there. And then as soon as you go on, I would record my wins. Like, I would always record my wins. Because it's always easy, like, as you're going along, just to remember all the negative things, like the bit of negative feedback that you got when it didn't go. I remember, actually, it was with Apay. That's a story. When I used to be a distribution manager for Microsoft, for managing his disty that he used to work for. And it was a QBR, quarterly business review, for the know. So I was leading it. And they come into TVP, the whole leadership team of Ingram, they come into TVP, and I must have been like 25 or something. I'm feeling the pressure. I've got my big bosses in there. You know, it's a two-way thing. The other organizations watching you, but also your bosses are watching you as well. It's always like a two-way thing. I got my deck ready. I'd gone through it. I plugged in. I was about to start. I mean, when I started up the deck, I realized like it was an old copy of the deck. So the stuff that I put in wasn't in there. And I was like, oh my god, the thing was about starting trying to reboot, and then the PC like wasn't rebooting, and it was just like, I just felt the ground.
I'm laughing, Zeph, because I can imagine everyone's been there, and the ultimate fear when you're on the spot, you've got people in the room, and you're like, I don't know what to do here, like rabbit in headlights.
It's like that, and then, you know, thinking all these senior people on there that are just like, what is going? And I remember Apay was the person that went, hey, like, no worries. I remember he was the one that stood. I'll always remember it, because I think he stood in actually before the people on my side stood in, you know, because he was there that, you know, talk about support and comfort in a room. Like, that was key. Like, he was one of it. Oh, don't worry, to Sam. And then he started talking about something else and maybe referencing some other thing, just to kind of keep it. So it wasn't just there to kind of take off that spotlight and the uncomfortability for me. And, you know, that thing, I remember when it came out of the room, and my direct manager was like, that was fine, like, it happens to everyone. And then another leader was kind of like, so my manager was like, don't worry, it's fine. And, you know, that ate me up for I don't know, I was probably like days, weeks, I just, in my head, couldn't get it out of my head. It knocks your confidence. But, you know, there's things that when you get over that, you have to remember all the good things that you've done. There was a reason why I was able to be in that room doing the review in the first place. If I wasn't competent or capable of it, I wouldn't have probably been in that room anyway. Like, you know, so I think those are the kind of thing. This is a long-winded answer to your 3 points. So it's just maybe I'll pass Apay to give a second point, because otherwise I'll be here for the whole thing.
I told you he was going to talk most of the session.
That first point of self-belief, like, and self-belief can also come from other people. I always used to use this term, borrow someone else's belief. Like, when I was in one of my first jobs, a mentor who I still speak to, he was like, what do you want to do next in your career? And I was like, I'd love to do this job in, like, you know, 3-4 years. And then he just went, but you could do that job now. And it instantly changed my whole perspective, because I'm like, if he believes that I can do this job now, then that must mean that I can do it, because he's great. He rates it. So I think there's just something in that over time. And so I'll stop. That's one point of your 3. And maybe I'll pass. Maybe Jill and Apay could do the other 2, 3, and we get like a
I've
been so long. I've forgotten actually what are the 3 points we're going to get to. No, just kidding. So, Jeramie, go on. You go.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I completely agree, and I think when you're, you know, when you look back and you start your first job, be that because you've been to university, you've started an apprenticeship, or you've gone straight from college, the one thing you don't have is those recurring experiences of doing well when it means something. Because doing well when it means something before you go into your first job is basically exams, right? And you live and die by an exam number, the percentage that you achieved. And all of that basically gets removed when you walk into the workplace. So you're having to recalibrate around, well, what is good? And with these people who I've never worked with, to be frank, I don't know what I'm good at, because never done a job before, let alone this job. And you have to have those learned experiences, good and bad, to figure out what you're good at, where you can feel strong, those advocates in the room who will stand up for you. And that is such a lovely example, Zeph, because I do think that your confidence builds when you find those people who've got your back. 100%. I think you and you'll always have that. And there might be your peers in the team, there might be your manager, it might be somebody else. But I think you start to believe what you can be when you have those people giving you that little shove in the back, that little helpful hand. But you've got to put some skin in the game to start to get that, right? So you've got to be brave. I think that's the number one thing I would say. Everyone started somewhere, and as Apay says to me all of the time, and everyone's a human. Everyone's got feelings. No one is a robot. So everyone has been scared, excited, stressed, angry, overwhelmed, celebratory. Everyone has been there and everyone's got every emotion. It's just that they've probably learned a bit better over the years how to manage it, temper it, whatever it might be. But emotions are a good thing. So be brave, put yourself out there, and know that if you make a mistake, so what? What's the worst thing that can happen if you make a mistake? And go from there.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm laughing about that mistake now, but at the time
it's like life changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Apay, what do you think though?
Yeah.
No, I first of all, I'm in awe of both of you as I hear you talk through your experiences and the points that you're making, which are absolutely spot on. And I can only say thank you for being so open, and thank you for helping others out there to see that, to your point there, Jeramie, that you're human, but you can persevere. I think it is. I love the point you touched on there, Zeph. It's absolutely important. Be yourself, right? I think the challenge, and I'll be vulnerable and own up to some of this. I think earlier on in my career, in my times, I think there were times where I did a bit of covering, right? In certain situations, certainly earlier on in my career.
Apay,
we do that.
Sorry to stop your flow. What do you mean there by covering?
So covering. So this is where when you're in a certain situation, certain environment, you dial down some of the things that make you who you are, which may include up to the point of trying to dial down what you think your ethnicity or perceived ethnicity behaves like, or some of the things. So it's how you speak, perhaps some of the language you use. It would be, or including, by the way, you will even start to, in some cases, when people ask you sort of what music do you like, you will dial down the music that is actually the ones you probably spend more time with, which is, for me back then, it was hip hop, it was R&B, it still is, by the way, Afro beats and so on, and you maybe dial up a bit more of the poppy or the stuff that isn't necessarily really what you always. So you try to conform a little bit to the environment that you're in, so that you can feel like you fit in.
Are you telling me you used to tell people you listen to NSYNC?
I don't think I've got as bad as.
I'm just checking. I'm just seeing where the flavour is.
I'm glad you went NSYNC. I thought if you went, if you started to go down and sort of take that, then no. But no, you would. Yeah, there's certain things that you would say that you were more akin to than you perhaps were really truly inside of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and thank you for explaining. And I'll speak for myself, but it's certainly, I can see myself identifying with a lot of the things that you're saying there, not least for the accent. Don't know if anyone's noticed it, but you used to be something I was pretty ashamed of. So yeah, I can quite literally hear what you're saying, Apay.
Yeah, exactly, and there are things like that. What music do you listen to? What books do you read? What are the cultural stuff that you connect to, and what you project in certain environments, and particularly in the work environment, which was a white male dominated environment, would be different to what actually your true self was about, and you projected, and that's how you felt that you had to kind of to get on and to move on in life. And so and until you get to a point that Zeph, you referenced it, which is you have a comfort in yourself and you have a belief in yourself, you do tend to cover in parts. That's, I think, quite different today. What I like about I think this generation and the opportunity actually the millennials have had is that they haven't had to necessarily do as much covering as they come into the workplace, but it's still there, still a reality. So being yourself is absolutely important, and this is why I think particularly for black community, we really have underestimated the importance of understanding our history. And that, in my humble opinion, this is, let me maybe speak personally, that's what's also helped me get have a sense of grounding. Now, when I was growing up, a strong African household, education was always key, and by the way, so you were having to read stuff that you necessarily wanted to, but you had to. And one of them was actually our Black African history. And so it wasn't that, by the way, where we tend to grow up with or be taught generally is it's all about slavery. But actually, hold on a minute, no. There are things that really show the real strong positive sides of us as Africans, and that is that we were traders, we were innovators, we had empires. Understanding all of that for me was actually very strong in helping me ground myself and feel actually I have a value in society. And that value in society piece is where I think our community struggles with a lot of the time. And then the other one is, I will always say to people at Microsoft that come in, and whether you're early in career or not, but certainly those earlier in career and those who are our leaders that you see in here, you know, Jeramie, Zeph, it's your Microsoft too. I think that's the other thing that sometimes when you come into an organization that is, you know, as amazing as Microsoft is, that you know, that, I don't want to use the term imposter syndrome, but that whole sense of belonging is still something you build. It's a muscle you kind of build and develop. And I get that, but you must also remember, to Zeph's point, you're here for a reason. You didn't just get a pass. You didn't just sort of turn up and sort of, you know what, I like it, come in, right? You worked hard to get to where you are today. Your intellectual horsepower got you to where you are today, but you're now part of an organization that's part of a big mission, and that mission is to go out and actually enable communities, organizations, people to do more out there. Now, excuse the kind of going back into some of the mission statement, but I think that's important that you understand that's the mission we're on, and you're part of that mission. So this is your mission too. This is your Microsoft too, right? And that's important.
Yeah, and I think Apay, to build on that, and you're talking about like building culture and community. The reason why us and a load of other organizations, like you see, we always reference the mission or the mantras, and I love what Satya says about the difference between the espouse culture. So we can all say the mission, that's easy, and everyone's got a mission statement, like basic business school 101 that we're taught, you know, write your mission or your vision out or whatever. But then the espouse versus the lived, like, is it real? And I think that's the differences in that. How do you actually build the community? So we can all say, come as you are, do as you love, empower every person in the organization planet to do and achieve more. But then if someone comes in and like, oh, that's not true, is it? And you quickly get found out. That's the thing, that you quickly get found out. It gets found out really, really quickly. So for anyone listening, I would say, like, you know, when you're trying to say, how, if it's my organization, or asking the hard questions, I would always ask hard questions of your leaders, like, what is our mission? What is it on this? And then, is it real? Yeah. Like, you know, someone's got to ask that. Is it real, or is it just words on a paper that we don't really do anything with? And challenge yourself and like, look around and ask, you know, is it real, or is it just words on a paper?
I had a question for Apay, because you would have started your role at a different time to us, and probably you was the only person.
Steam trains and
but you probably was the only person of color, or one of few people of color within the business. So what I want to understand is, how did you sort of develop that company culture? How did it get to the point where it is now, where you've got people like Zeph who you've been able to build this great relationship with, and Zeph feels much more comfortable now in the workplace in comparison to maybe how you started? Because I think that might be something that's quite interesting to people who are within your similar sort of stature, been at a company for a long period of time, but I'm not too sure how they can start turning the screws to start making it a little bit more comfortable for people from other backgrounds.
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex, and thanks for the question. I think, look, I'm actually going to answer this question in the framework that we have within Microsoft. It's one of our leadership frameworks, and I think it really talks very strongly, and it's a really nice framework to kind of answer the question. I think the first thing as you come in is that you've got to realize and recognize, and I don't think that's too different today, by the way, because I just think if you look at the representation of the black community in fact the BAME community overall in the IT industry, it's still remarkably low, right? And so we've got to model, right? So when we turn up, we've got to model, and we've got to unfortunately, we do have to be the best of the best out there, because in certain situations, the reality is you're representing your community. I don't want to kind of put that on us as each individual, and I know it sounds like a very big thing to put on individuals, but that is the reality. And I don't want us to. I can easily go on and come in and you will, whatever you perform, it's just going to be on you. Actually, that would be disingenuous, because the fact is there will be those who will look at you and look at your performance, and if certain things don't go right in the right way, it won't be just on you as an individual, it will be on your community, because that's what will happen. Assumptions are made. And that's just the reality we're in today. You know, it's not right, it's not easy, it's not nice, but it is the reality. Let's kind of, so you got to model, right, and make sure we're always performing our best, doing our best. So that those coming behind us, and that's what we're doing this for, by the way, there are those coming behind us, we're opening the doors for them, right? The next thing is that it's about coaching, right? And that's that's what the next piece of our leadership framework, which is around coach, right? How are we coaching? And I tend to give up a lot of time and spend a lot of time on coaching. Zeph, I'm sure, will attest to this. You know, if he ever, whenever he needed a bit of time on any coaching or any mentoring, I'd make that time available for him, and as do with others, right, Jeramie and so on. But I also would ask them to do the same for others. I'd ask you, Alex, to do with us, and I'll ask all of us in positions of privilege, in other words, being in the roles that we're in, to do that for others. And that's very, very important, and that's how you help others, I think, come into to our industry and encourage those who are already in our industry to kind of develop and evolve. And then the last piece around that is really that care piece, right? And making sure that you're showing that care for the organization, for the team, and then for the individuals in there, and that it's seen as it's part of that kind of how we caring for each other as human beings first and foremost. It's important to understand that, because you don't want to start putting, the barriers exist, but we want to break those down, and we want to care as a society, we want to care as a community, and making sure that therefore you are keeping an eye on how people are when they come in. Are they feeling comfortable? Are you spotting where they're not feeling so comfortable? Are you making sure you're leaning in so that you can get them out of wherever it is they're in and get them to kind of perform? Because ultimately that's how you develop a great organization, but that's how we also develop a great society.
Brilliant.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, great. Absolutely makes sense, Apay. And like any good conversations, from all of the points that you and Zeph have raised, I think it makes us want to talk a lot more about all of those. But if I start to summarise some of the great conversation we've had, I mean, we've actually spent a lot of time talking about young people and how the industry has changed. And thankfully, Apay, from when you started 200 years ago to when Alex maybe started a few years ago, things have evolved, but actually there is still way more to do. And we need to be using those, that modelling behaviour and making sure that we are, we're being who we want to be, but also we're creating the industry we want for people who might be 20, might be 15, they might be 5, because our industry is going to live long past any of us, and we need to make sure it's the right industry and it's inclusive for everybody. But we've also speaking of what it means to be successful, and that means being brave and courageous, and it means getting those mentors who are going to back you and support you and tell you the hard truth. So I will admit that all of my mentors have given me really good advice, but also really honest, and I think we need that to really progress. And I also think it's about recognising that we all belong, and there's a place for all of us, and actually it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, what gender you are, what additional needs you might have. The tech industry is something that can represent everybody, and it does represent everybody, but we want it to do even more of that. So I'm going to make a cheeky request, because I think that there's lots of things that we could pick up on here, and You know, first of all, I think it's about leadership, because as much as we can create the communities and we can be what we want to see, ultimately, to your point, Zeph, everyone's got a boss and everyone needs to be held to account, and we need to make sure that they are doing the right things and that filters down. So I think there's definitely maybe some value in looking at that as a particular topic. But also then maybe looking at more around that mentoring part of it, because there are multiple programs that we have at Microsoft. Actually, TCare, we want to make sure we're supporting our community and getting a more diverse tech industry. So there's definitely a conversation that we could pick up on there. So yeah, I'm going to be very cheeky and hope you won't say no off the cuff, but it would be great to pick up with both of you at another point around that. But before I hand over to Alex, I'd just say thank you to both of you for your time and your insight and your honesty, because these are really, really important topics, and now I really value both of your opinions and your support. Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate it. So yeah, no, same again from myself. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the TK podcast. I hope listeners, you've got some value from this. I mean, I'm definitely going to be going through this again and scribbling down some notes that I can take away, because there's definitely some nuggets of success that can be taken into your roles or into your lives or to your peers. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But please do follow us on all social media channels. Please follow up with Zeph and Apay on LinkedIn and on their socials as well. I'm sure they'll be quite open to answering any questions or queries that you have, whether it be about you going into a new role or you're someone who's seasoned in your role. And yeah, we really look forward to hearing your successes, and seeing and hoping that you're going to be able to take this information and really thrive in everything that you do. So until the next podcast, it's been great. It's been Alex, it's been Joe, Apay, Zeph, and yeah, have a good day. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. So please continue the dialogue on socials. To stay updated on when we release the next episode, follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at TC4RE. And don't forget to check our website at www.tcare.org for more information and content on today's topics.